I'm just going to give you a quick introduction to the Growth Hub and what it is we do, just in case you haven't dealt with us before. I recognise a few names, but it's always worth hearing again, I suppose. And then I'm just going to go over a bit of detail of what the campaign aims were and sort of what this includes and involves. So Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire Growth Hub is one of 38 growth hubs in the UK that was brought together by centralised government to unlock private sector growth and enable businesses to access the support and funding and alternative finance options that are available. So we work within the Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire LEP area, and we have around 150 referral partners, roughly 20 of which are funding and finance. And they offer so many different things, it'd take me too long to go through it all. So it's always worth giving us a call if there's anything you're looking to do with the business, or if you're ever looking to grow. It is always worth contacting ourselves first, or the chamber as well, and we'll be more than happy to help. So on the next slide, please, Jonathan, there's just a little video that explains the Growth Hub and our proposal further and what it is that we offer as an organisation.
Introducing Evolving Enterprise from Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire Growth Hub, a unique package of fully funded services to help enterprising businesses across Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire to fuel their growth ambitions. The first step is to call the business helpline to speak with a qualified advisor. Our helpline offers a comprehensive triage service to unlock fully funded support. For the next step, our accredited business advisors will complete a one-to-one diagnostic tailored to each individual business, which will then identify the specialist support needed. Following your diagnostic, our specialists will support you in the relevant areas to evolve your business. The areas our specialists cover are recovery and growth, HR, marketing, international trade, and finance. Take the first steps in evolving your enterprise by contacting our business helpline. Our business advisors and specialists are ready to help you. Call us on 0300 111 8002.
That video just details a little bit more really about what it is that we offer as a growth hub, and explains the specialist advisors that we do also have available. So HR, marketing, international trade, funding and finance, and also high growth and recovery. But the Gearing for Growth 2022 campaign that we launched at the very end of last year really was all about celebrating the resilience of Staffordshire businesses throughout the pandemic, so over the past 2 years now really. And then moving forward into 2022, we wanted to bring together all of the support and the partners and the organisations that we have available to help you grow your business moving forward this year and reach those aspirations and goals that you've got in place. So we've a number of different webinars and workshops, some of which obviously are CPD accredited. For example, this one, we wanted to bring that all together, and that's what we're aiming to do on the 28th of March with all of the exhibitors that we think are relevant, and sort of that they'll be able to speak on the day as well to give you some details about what it is that they offer, with some grant applications also available on the day, providing eligibility, etc. But the next little video on the slides will explain the Gearing for Growth campaign a bit further. Just the next slide, sorry, Jonathan.
All right, that was my fault. Technology.
that video just details a little bit more around the Gearing for Growth campaign and what it was that we've had included in that. But what I'll do now is I will hand over to Jonathan, and I will leave you all to your workshop for this morning. Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay, thank you, Trish, much appreciated. So good morning, everybody. Feel free to come on camera if you want to. Don't feel that you have to be shy. So my name, as Tricia said, is Jonathan Andrew. My company is Bassage Business Services. We have spent the last 15 years working with companies to help them to maximise their chances of winning bids and tenders. We've also worked across a number of public sector bodies, so local authorities, schools, universities, central government departments, helping them to manage procurement activities. So the content that we're going to work through this morning actually looks at sort of advanced bid writing from both sides of the equation, because what you have to do ultimately is put yourself in the evaluator's shoes when it comes to looking at bids. So we've worked across a number of sectors, and our expertise is bid management, it's procurement legislation. Your expertise in your business is your business. What I'm hoping to do this morning is to share some hints and tips with you that will help to strengthen the opportunities that you have, so that maximizes your chances of winning. If anybody ever tells you that they will guarantee you that you will win a bid by working with them, my advice would be to run away and run very quickly, because nobody can ever give you those guarantees. People can work with you. The training course this morning will help you to maximize your chances of success. But if one of your competitors has a better product or a more compelling price, then the chances are they will win the work. And it's the important part is you take the feedback and you learn from that for any future bids. So what we're going to run through this morning is very briefly, we're going to look at just sourcing a number of bids and tenders, the bid process, and that has not changed since we left the European Union, but it will change next year. And hopefully, if the government consultation is to be believed, hopefully it will be a simplified process in 2023. We will talk about structuring bid responses. We will also look at how you write compelling bids and tenders. We'll look at a question and we'll break it down, and I'll leave you with some top tips. These sessions work best of all if it's not me doing all the talking. So I am looking for interaction this morning. Unfortunately, because I'm sharing the screen, I can't see the chat. So if you've got any questions as we're going through, please do shout up, please do ask, and please do contribute. If you've got experiences either that reinforce what I'm saying or even that contradict what I'm saying, then please do share them with the rest of the group, because there is no one definitive answer. Bid writing can be subjective. What we try and do in a procurement process is take that subjectivity out of the process and make it very objective, but sometimes subjectivity can creep in. So please do shout up with your own experiences. In terms of the objectives for this morning, I'm not going to read through all of these because you can read them, but what I'd like to do before we start, obviously you've got the objectives on the screen. If we can just whiz round the group, and if you could quickly just introduce yourself and your company, and tell us what experience you've had of bidding, and whether there's anything else over and above the objectives on the screen there that you would like to get out of this morning. That would be really helpful. Thank you, Lisa, for coming on camera. Thank you, Alan, for coming on camera, and Charlie, excellent. People are coming on camera now. That's really good. So, Alan, can I start with you, please?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, basically, this total subject hits a raw nerve with me at the moment. We've we've recently come off the back of a bid for a local authority tender and lost out by 0.34 of 1%. And when I looked into the basics of why this had happened, there were quite a number of alarming things, both from my side and also from the local authority side. So realistically, I'm here today trying to understand a little bit more about the process, and in particular the non-price bid element of putting in a tender in. I think you hit the nail on the head where you said some of the things are subjective, and that's really what I'm here today to try and understand.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Alan. Well, hopefully we'll help you to achieve that. Charlie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah. So my name's Charlie Houston Brown. My company is called the Rushkeep Solutions. I've never really had to bid for work in the past. I'm in the business systems arena, so it doesn't tend to always go to competitive bidding, but it is something I'm quite keen to have a go at. Of course, I do have to bid to get on expert panels and so on, such as for Keele University, supply that. So that's helpful. And I also have some other interests regarding grant applications, which is kind of a similar kind of thing. So I just thought I'd come and listen to the experts this morning.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Charlie. Lisa.
Yeah, morning, everybody. My name's Lisa Jenkins. I'm a business development executive at a company called Juniper Training, and we're an independent training provider. So I'm relatively new into bid writing and tender writing, but I'm after any hints, tips, and anything to get funding for us as an organisation in order to help people move forward in the education world.
Brilliant. Thank you. Come to Sarah next, please. Oh, sorry, it's Carl on Sarah's computer.
Sarah booked the link in for me. So yeah, morning all. I've actually sat in a number of Jonathan's seminars before, so I've always found them really useful and very informative. Introduction, my name's Carl Croft. I own an architectural practice based in Stafford. Jonathan and I sit on the chamber board in Stafford, so we know each other, I suppose. What I'm looking for really from this is a bit of an update in terms of where we think we're going with bid processes and how things are evolving, and really just to get better at the process. We don't do huge amounts of bidding through formal tendering, but it is an area that we're looking to do more of. So yeah, any sort of tips and hints will be appreciated.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Carl. Siobhan, are you happy to go next? You're on mute, Siobhan, if you're there. No. Right, shall we go to Stuart next then, please? Are you there, Stuart? No. Christian, third time lucky?
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Hi, Carl as well, sorry. Similar to Carl, I'm an architect, and I'm sort of recently looking into doing sort of work myself as well. So I was keen to, come along. I've been involved historically in looking at some sort of online. It's mostly PQQ in architecture, to be honest, or competition bids. So again, the strategies and objectives you're putting forward, I'm quite interested in, but equally anything that's sort of lottery funding, sort of bids for even sort of community sort of activation sort of stuff as well, arts council or anything. It'd be interesting to sort of learn from that, take that forward. Thanks.
Okay, right, we'll see what we can do. Thank you. So Siobhan, Stuart, if you are there and you do want to introduce yourselves, do feel free later on. As I say, the way these sessions work best is if they are interactive. Bids and tenders are not the most riveting subject in the world, and I try and make it as interesting as I possibly can. But the way it really comes to life is with your examples and with experiences that you have had as part of the process. And Alan, you sort of outlined some of the frustrations, and that's not uncommon. And where you are looking at something that's 0.34%, that can be really challenging. So yeah, there are things we can talk about there in terms of process that you can look at as part of the feedback, but we'll cover that a little bit later on. So I just wanted to start ultimately with, why would you consider bids and tenders as part of your business? And there are lots of different reasons, and I'm going to focus primarily this morning on bids and tenders into public sector organisations. But these principles increasingly apply across private sector organisations as well. So where a private sector company is working on a project, so for example, there's a lot of activity taking place in Staffordshire at the moment around High Speed 2 and the infrastructure development. That's being led predominantly by private sector organisations. But because the funding comes from the public sector, they have to follow the public sector procurement regulations, the guidelines. So you will increasingly see, where you are bidding for private sector opportunities, you'll see the same principles apply, so supplier selection questionnaire, etc. Excuse me. So some of the benefits around working with public sector, this is about business growth and diversification for your businesses. It gives you a good source of business, longevity of contracts. So there will always be a public sector. The public sector changes constantly in terms of its structure, its format. Local authorities merge, new initiatives come on stream, new organisations, new non-departmental public bodies pop up all the time. But the public sector will always exist in some guise. Last year, the public sector spent over £290 billion with private sector organisations. Now that's buying everything from tanks to paper clips. So it really does, it really does lead to a diverse range of options. Public sector has to make payment to suppliers within 30 days of a correctly presented invoice. So from a cash flow perspective, actually working with the public sector is very beneficial. Working capital costs are reduced. Some public sector organisations will pay you more promptly, so within 5 days, possibly within 10 days. So again, that is a business benefit. And equally, you will hopefully have some long-term stability, because contracts can often be for between 2 to 4 years, and in some industries, 8, 10-year contracts are prevalent as well. So it gives you a good solid platform to work from. But as with all these things, never put all your eggs in one basket, so never become wholly dependent on the public sector. Equally, you want to have that balance in your business for your customer base. Right, moving on. And just very quickly, I'm not going to go through all of these, but if you are looking to find business and bid opportunities, there are hundreds of websites out there, and literally when I say hundreds, I'm not exaggerating. These are some of the key websites. And very briefly, the Find a Tender service, so the very top website there on the list, that replaced the old Tenders Electronic Daily website. So that is for opportunities that are above the financial thresholds in the public contract regulations. So typically opportunities above £200,000. The next website, Contracts Finder, we're going to, hopefully, if I can get the technology to work, we're going to have a look at that in a minute. But Contracts Finder, any opportunity with a lifetime value above £25,000 should be advertised on the Contracts Finder website. So if you are going to look at one website and only one website, my advice to you would be have a look at the Contracts Finder website. It's run by the government. It is free of charge. The other websites that I've listed there, Blue Light is for emergency services. DFPNI is if you are looking at opportunities in Northern Ireland, Public Contracts Scotland, Celta Wales, obviously fairly self-explanatory there. So let's have a look. So this is what the Contracts Finder website actually looks like. So as you can see, you go onto the homepage and it will ask you to find a contract. You can enter a keyword search, and then as you go down, you can either search nationwide, you can search by a region, or you can search by a postcode opportunity. And you can also search by different stages of procurement. So you can look at current opportunities, you can look at opportunities that have been announced that will come up in the future. You can also look at awarded contracts. Now, I'm just going to stop sharing that screen, and hopefully, if I then share my next screen, just bear with me. Right, now, hopefully, so knowing that there were a couple of architects on the training course this morning, hopefully you can all see the Contracts Finder website. Can someone just nod their head? You can see a website there that's I've typed in the word architect, and I have looked for current opportunities and early opportunities. And the first opportunity that it brought up on this search today is architect and principal designer appointments for a stadium community building by Staffordshire County Council. It's a £40,000 opportunity, or up to £40,000. It was published on the 24th of February, so it was published the back end of last week. You can see more details about the opportunity. So it's actually for Cannock Chase District Council. And in this particular instance, Staffordshire County Council manages procurement on behalf of the county. The closing date for tenders to be received is the 25th of March. The contract is due to start in April. And it then goes, and again, I'm assuming you can all see as I'm scrolling down the screen here, it actually gives you a description of the opportunity, and it tells you who to contact to find out more information. So that's giving you details of a live opportunity. Hopefully the screen has just changed, and I'm still searching for architect, but this time you can see awarded contracts. Is that showing on the screen? Yep, perfect. So as an example here, the first one we look at, an award publication published yesterday by the London Borough of Sutton. Contract value £120,000. It tells you all of the details, and it tells you who has been awarded the contract. So the value of the contract, £120,000, and it actually gives you the supplier details for the contact opportunity. Now, you might be asking, well, why is that important? What's the relevance? And the key relevance there is when you are looking at opportunities in your sector and keyword searching, you can find who of your competitors are proactive in the market. And it's always useful to understand who your competitors are and what sort of bids they're bidding for. And equally, not only that, what sort of values of opportunity they're actually bidding for and securing contracts. So you might think a contract is worth Right, now I'm just having a slight technical issue here because I can't get the PowerPoint deck back on the screen, so bear with me. This is where we always run into problems. Now, can you see the slides or not? No. Okay, sorry about that. We'll try again. And let me resume share. No. You can't see the slides. No. Right, just bear with me one moment. This is where we need someone really to do a song and dance routine. Hopefully. Get the slides back on the screen. Right, sorry about this, everybody. I think we're hopefully there. Right, hopefully you can now see the slides again from where we left off. Can someone just give me a thumbs up if you can see the slides?
It's not the slides. It's not the slides though. It's the government website. Find the contract.
Hopefully, is that the slide?
Slides back, yeah, brilliant.
Perfect, thank you. There's apologies for that. Yeah, never let me loose with technology. It never works. Right, so the Contracts Finder website is a really, really valuable source of information. It is free to use. It will always be free to use because it is run by the government. There are a number of sites and again, a number of organisations who you can pay. If you, rather than you doing the search, you can pay others to do the search on your behalf. If you want to do that, the two main services that I've used in the past, so I'm speaking here from sort of personal experience. Tenders Direct is the market leader. The cost is about £1,100 a year for a subscription, and they will work with you to identify keywords. They'll then send you a daily summary of opportunities within your sector. The other service that I've used in the past is B2B Quote Tenders. They are based in Wolverhampton. They offer a very similar service at a lower cost. It's about £400 a year for them and for their service. Very much depends on what you're looking for. There are others out there, Contracts Advance, Bidstat, etc. But those are the two main websites if you are going to use a paid for service. Right. So now I'm not going to go through all of this slide. You'll be pleased to know this is the process for the public contract regulations. So all public bodies have to follow public contract regulations. This is the legislation that impacts on procurement. The legislation was created in 2015 when we were still members of the European Union. Nothing has changed following our departure from the European Union as yet, although there are changes underfoot, and there are 5 different routes to market that the public sector can follow for larger value opportunities. And by larger value, I am talking about sort of £200,000 lifetime contract value. The top 2 routes to market on that slide are the most prevalent. Under the consultation that's taking place currently, the government is looking to simplify this. So rather than having 5 routes to market, they might well just have 2, possibly 3. But the most prevalent are what we call the open procedure here or the restricted procedure. And they are very similar, but in a nutshell, the process is that the buying organisation, so the local authority, the government department, the school, the college, etc., issues a contract notice. And that contract notice is the document that I've just shown you on the Contracts Finder website. So it basically sets out all of the information about the opportunity. So who the buyer is, the indicative contract value, the description of what they're looking for, how you should apply, how you should return the bid documents. And if that's the first time that opportunity has gone live, so the one we saw that was issued by Staffordshire County Council on behalf of Cannock Chase Council, just that one is a new opportunity. It's just gone live, and the buying organisation has to give you 30 days, that's 30 calendar days, in which to respond to the opportunity. So it's really important, if you are searching for opportunities, that you are doing that on a regular basis, because if, for example, you only search once a week, you've actually lost 7 days potentially out of that 30 days. So you can see that the timescales are very tight. If there has been what's called a prior information notice, a PIN, that prior information notice would in essence say to you that an opportunity will be published at some point in the next few months. That's as much information as they give. At that point in time, if they've issued the prior information notice, actually then you're restricted, or they're limited to only having to give you 15 days to respond to the opportunity. So the timescales again are very short. An open process basically means any company can apply. So whatever the company, whoever they are, they can request the bid documents and make a bid submission. The restricted procedure is slightly different insofar as it goes through a standard supplier selection questionnaire first, and that's a historical document that's asking for information about your business, and from that they will shortlist a minimum of 5 bidders to move to the full invitation to tender stage. And if they do go down that route, you have 30 days ordinarily to respond to the supplier selection questionnaire, and then if you are successful at stage 2, you have up to 25 days in which to respond. Again, if they've issued a prior information notice, when it gets to the invitation to tender stage, that can be as little as 10 days. I'm not going to talk about the other processes because they are quite rare in terms of usage. So the majority of opportunities will come through either an open or a restricted process. Does that make sense? Any questions so far? Again, shout up if you've got any questions.
Just a question. I'm guessing we'll get copies of some of these slides, will we, John? Or
all of the slides, Trish will correct me if I'm wrong, but all of the slides will be uploaded. So you will be able to download them and access them, and again, you'll be able to listen to the recording over again as well.
Thank you.
So in terms of strategies for responding to bids and tenders, whether you are a sole trader, whether you are a multinational company, the process is the same basically that you go through. Obviously, if there's only you in your business, well, you're going to have to take on more of the roles. But ultimately, what's really important is that you form a bid team, a team of people who are going to support the production and the response to the tender opportunity. Now, if you are a sole trader, if you are on your own, you're sat there thinking, well, hang on, that means I've got to do everything. Well, no, it doesn't, because I'm sure you might have family, friends, or other business colleagues who you can draw upon. There are organisations out there who provide support. So there are ways that you can actually get that benefit of a team approach. And there are several things that you need to take into account when you are thinking about a bid. But first and foremost, every business should have a bid or no bid process. Now, this doesn't have to be formally documented or recorded, but it is, rather than chasing lots of opportunities that you might not be successful with, you need some sort of filtering system to actually work out what bids are worth applying for. So anyone got any ideas? Anyone want to shout out about what things you might want to take into account as part of that bid no bid process?
I think the turnover is going to be relevant, isn't it, Jonathan?
It is. So yes, there is a criteria within the public contract regulations, and basically if the value of the contract is more than 50% of your annual turnover, you will be considered to be a high risk. So the chances of you being successful in that opportunity are reduced. So turnover, absolutely. Any others that anyone wants to call out? Come on, don't be shy.
Serviceability.
Sorry?
Serviceability.
Serviceability, absolutely critical. Can you, if you win the work, can you deliver the work in accordance with the customer's timescales? Because if you can't, then you really are wasting your time in applying. So yep, serviceability, absolutely. Any others that anyone wants to raise?
The ability for your suppliers to input into the process. Yes. Quite often we get lumped in with engineers and QSs, for example.
Yeah, so where you are working, where you have other people who are involved, have they got the capacity to respond, and again, the capacity to deliver in the timescales? Existing knowledge of the customer. So what do you know about the customer? Have you got an existing relationship with them? Is this an opportunity that's speculative, for example? What do you know about the needs of the organisation? Have you got a track record to deliver? So you don't necessarily have to have a track record of working within the public sector, and we'll talk later about experiences, references, and so on. But have you got a track record? Can you meet all of the requirements of the specification? So with a tender opportunity, when it's issued, there will be a specification, a service specification. Read through that, get someone else to read through it as well, and just double check, can you meet all of the requirements? Because if you can't, you have to question, are you going to win that bid? Because some of your competitors might well be in a better position than you. So that is important to take into consideration. So in terms of who should be in the bid team, and again, this will very much depend on your business, but there needs to be someone who's got all of the sort of the central or corporate information that's to hand, whether that's your policies and processes, we'll talk about those later on, whether it's insurances, finances, etc. You will absolutely need knowledge and subject specialists, because with the best will in the world, anybody can write a bid, but without having some knowledge or subject specialist input, it's going to be fairly meaningless. You need a progress chaser. If you've got multiple people contributing, so if you have different people contributing to different parts of the response, you need to make sure that everybody is working to the agreed timescales that you have. You will need a proofreader. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. And all bids nowadays are pretty much submitted electronically, but someone will have to sign, and that's usually the managing director, the chief executive. So you will need to allow time for that sign-off process. Really important, because again, because of the fact now that bids are submitted electronically, if the response deadline is 12 noon on the 1st of March, that really does mean 11:59 and 59 seconds. If you get to 12 noon, the portal will close. And if you haven't uploaded your bid response, it's too late, and there will be no second chance. So really, really important you allow time in the process. And in terms of the the responsibilities of the bid team, and this is everybody's responsibility, the first thing to do is you have to read all of the bid documentation. And I really do mean all of the bid documentation. So there will be a specification, there will be a set of questions, there will probably be a draft contract. The time to read those is before you submit your bid. If you secure the work, that is not the time to then start negotiating terms and conditions in the contract. You should have done all of that during the bid process. So you need to read all of the bid documentation. Absolutely have an inception meeting with whoever has read the bid documents. Make sure that you sit down with them and go through the bid documents. And the main reason for that is if all of us sat down now and read a bid document, we would all pick up something slightly different. We would all take something different away from that bid document. And there is nothing to say that what I take away from that bid document is more important than what you take away from it. So it's really important that you get those different perspectives. You need to confirm roles. So who's going to do what? Who's actually going to contribute what to the bid response? Allocate the questions to whoever is best placed to deliver the responses, and then make sure that those draft responses are come back to you in time. Where there are questions, and there will be questions undoubtedly, if you are going to ask those questions of the buyer, before you do that, first and foremost, just check with a colleague, make sure that that question hasn't actually been answered somewhere within the bid document and you've just overlooked it. If it hasn't, have one person nominated for checking the portal, uploading questions, receiving responses, and then disseminating that information. Make sure you have a project plan. You will have probably a 4-week window for your bid. Those 4 weeks will go very quickly because you will still absolutely have a day job to do as well. So please make sure that you allocate enough time, make sure there are regular reviews, and make sure that you've got someone who's chasing for all of that information to come back together. And again, as part of the process, before you start, how many of you have got a bid library of previous bids that you've submitted? Yeah, 1 or 2 of you. Right, so a bid library can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. So I always advocate that companies do have a bid library because you'll start to see trends and common themes, common questions throughout the bid process. So where you've got that, how do you access it? But you have to be really careful about taking previous bid responses and copying them and pasting them into the current response. I did some work on some evaluation work for a police force, and as part of one bidder's response, all the way through the bid, they referenced a completely different police force, and it was obvious that what they had done was a cut and paste and forgotten to then change the name of the customer that they were bidding into. And it's such an easy mistake to make, and everyone says, well, I'd never make that mistake. You'd be surprised actually how many people do. And it's really easy in the heat of the moment to overlook something simple. So just tread carefully with your bid library, but typically they are valuable. Customer research is absolutely vital. So find out as much as you can about your customer. What are their needs? What are their pain points? Some of that will be in the bid document, but not necessarily all of it. So, you know, this is where Google is your friend. This is where if it's an existing customer, you have a bit of an advantage because clearly you've got a relationship with them. It's always worth trying to find out as much as you can about the customer. I always say, if you are going to contact the buyers, do tread carefully. Once the tender has been issued, only ever contact them through the mechanism that they've specified in the bid. Even if you know them, even if you have an existing relationship with them, do not jeopardize your chances in the bid, because if you contact them outside that process, that can be seen to be canvassing. And as a result of that, you could well be excluded from the bid process. So please do tread very carefully. That's really important. I just want to touch now on how you maximize some of your chances of success. So this would be the evaluation criteria for the narrative, the written responses. Now, there is no consistency across public sector. So this is a 6-point scoring scale because the 0 counts. So this is 6 point. I've seen 3 point, I've seen 6 point, 5 point, 10 point, 15 point scoring scales. They all vary. Clearly, when you are responding to a question in a bid, what you are trying to do in that bid is maximize your score and score 5 for the question. So what you need to do is actually read the description of what is it the evaluators are looking for. So obviously there is a question that you need to answer, but to score maximum points, the description there says excellent response, very well presented, giving a full and accurate understanding of the requirements with demonstrable evidence and added value in service provision. So if you look at the scoring criteria, if you answer the question, you will score 4 points in this particular set criteria. You need to be looking at how you score the 5. And in this particular case, that is about demonstrable evidence and added value in service provision. So I've never yet read or evaluated a bid response where the person responding to the bid has said, well, do you know what? We're pretty mediocre at this, but give us a chance and we will give it our best shot. Doesn't happen. No one ever says that in a bid response. Everybody will say to you, we're the best. We're number 1 in our market. We deliver. Excuse me. So you have to stand out from the people you are competing against. And the way to do that is to give solid evidence as to why they should choose you. So if you can say, we have delivered X number of contracts identical to this previously, all of them delivered on time, within budget. If you have a testimonial from a previous customer that reinforces what you are saying, if you've got statistics, so if you are collecting performance statistics in your business that say, for example, 98% of phone calls are answered within 5 seconds, or whatever the relevant statistic is to the question, that's what you need to be including, because everybody will say, we're the best, we can deliver, we'll meet your specification. And when you've read 5, 10, 15, I did one piece of evaluation for Stoke City Council, we had 80 bid responses. When you've read 50 times that we're number 1 in the area and we're the best, you get a little bit jaded. So make your response stand out. And the way to do that is through evidence. Any questions on that point? No. We will come back to that, because as we go through the rest of the stuff this morning, that will come to the fore. Just very briefly, when it comes to evaluating price, your commercial evaluation, this is how the majority of bids, not all bids, but this is how the majority of bids are scored. So they will look at the lowest priced tender, and the lowest priced tender will score 100% of the available score for price. So if the price commercial section of the bid is worth 40% of the overall score, the lowest priced bidder will score 40%. And every other bid will then be assessed pro rata. So if you are 20% more expensive than the lowest priced bidder, and the price score is worth 40%, you would score 32% because you would lose 20% of the available price score. Does that make sense? Yeah, give me a thumbs up if that's clear. Or yeah, and if anyone wants me to explain that anymore, obviously just shout. So again, when you are bidding for work, at the end of the day, you are in business. You are in business to make a profit. You have to decide what your walkaway price is for a particular opportunity. And my advice to you is whatever your walkaway price is, that's the price that you submit as part of your bid response. Because, and I've had this happen to me, I've had customers who I've worked with, they've lost an opportunity and they've lost out by £500, £1,000. And they've said to me, well, if I'd have known it was going to be secured at that price, I'd have offered that price. And my response back to them is, well, in that case, you should have gone in at that price, because there are no second chances when it comes to public sector procurement. I say that there are very occasionally, if there is a process that's going through the competitive dialogue with negotiation where the criteria aren't particularly clear, you might get the opportunity to negotiate, but it's very rare. The majority of bids that come out, the price you put back in your bid response document, that's the price that is evaluated, and that's the win or lose. Any questions on the evaluation criteria and the scoring? No. Okay, right. We're going to move on. So in terms of structuring a bid response, the majority of higher value opportunities do follow a very structured process. And where they provide you with a response template, you have to use that response template. So if the bid document is very clear and explicit, use it. But sometimes there may well not be a bid template. For lower value bids, you might well just have to create a response. And in that case, my recommendation, and I'm going to run through this fairly quickly, but my recommendation in that instance is follow the project brief. So whatever the headings are in the project brief, that's what you need to be following as part of your response. So use their headings, make it really easy for the evaluator to see that you've followed their requirements, you've understood what's asked of you, and you've actually responded accordingly. Use their terminology. So if they talk about customers and you talk about clients, actually there's a bit of a mismatch going on already, and subliminally that can start to impact on the evaluator's perception of your response. And again, make sure you address all of the points in the brief. So as I've said, if there is a response template, then clearly do use it, and never amend it unless you receive permission to do so. So we see lots of responses that are in tabular format. We see a number of responses, frustratingly in my view, that are in Microsoft Excel, and you have to type into Microsoft Excel, and that's really hard. That is so that they can actually then put all of the responses side by side. It makes it slightly easier for an evaluator, just make it harder for you responding to the opportunity, because formatting is lost. So don't amend the template, because that could actually lead to you being excluded from the process. Make sure you answer each question that you're asked, and I'll come back to this later on, but you would be amazed how many people, when submitting a bid response, answer a completely different question to the one that's been asked, because they start answering the question, they go off at a tangent, and then the whole question comes back to what they think you want to hear rather than what the question actually addresses and requires. And again, make sure you answer every section of the brief. If you can create your own template, there are some things that you might want to consider. Obviously, your own response template, you can use that for private sector opportunities as well as public sector opportunities. You own the formatting, you can be creative in what you do. What I would say there is just be wary of file size, because when you are submitting responses, if it's a very large file, it may not go through. If you're submitting by email, where it's a response template, or even to a portal, the online portals have a maximum file size that you can upload. So make sure that it's not too heavy. The other thing to take into account is, obviously, if it's your format, you can actually then structure the order, and I'm going to give you a suggested structure in a moment, and you can use images and diagrams, and we'll touch on that later on. But where you have images and diagrams in a bid response, obviously they can tell a story. If you've got a word count restriction, images are a good way to get round that. I would always say never lead with price, because that way people will look at it and say, well, that's expensive, before they've even read the response. So what I would suggest, if you are looking to create a bid or quotation template for your own use, start with an executive summary, ideally one side of A4. Just summarize your offer. Tell them what makes your bid different. This is your opportunity to grab their attention and make them want to read on. So that's what your executive summary should do. So lots of people are always tempted when you're submitting a response to start talking about themselves. XYZ Limited are the #1 in the marketplace for the production of widgets. And so what? What's the relevance to the buyer? So always put your customer and your customer's needs first. So, exec summary is your first section, and then meeting the buyer's requirements. And you could actually put, if, as we saw on the opportunity on Contracts Finder earlier on, you could actually put as the heading, meeting Cannock Chase Council's requirements, if they were the customer. So again, it's all about that customer positioning, customer focus. Make sure you are addressing all of the things that they require as part of your bid response to them. You don't always get a second chance. So meeting the buyer's requirements comes second. You can then look at your commercial position, be that price, be that payment terms, that's your call. And then what I would say is talk about your business last of all. So don't just here go to your website and pull out whatever's on your website about your corporate information. Tailor this to meet the customer's needs. So tell them why your experience is relevant. Tell them what you've delivered historically. Tell them about some of the successes. Always include testimonials where you can, because a customer saying how good you are carries much more value than you telling me how good you are. No one's ever going to say they're rubbish, but if a customer's telling me you're good, I'm more likely to take notice. And again, in any bid sort of quotation template that you produce, have a call to action. So what are the next steps? How do people contact you if they want to take this forward? So give them that call to action. So that's sort of where something isn't predefined. Does anyone have any questions at this stage before we move on to the more prescribed documents? No? You're all very quiet this morning. I'm happy to take questions at any point in time, so do feel free to interrupt me as we go through. So what you will find in lots of opportunities is there is a standard supplier selection questionnaire, and this is a prescribed document. It's prescribed in the public contract regulations. If you go onto Google and search supplier selection questionnaire, there is on the government website a standard template, and I would certainly recommend, if you haven't seen one previously, it's worth going online, downloading that document and filling in all of the core information and then saving it into your bid library, because it will save you time later on. So the subject areas, and I'll run through this briefly, the subject areas that are covered, first and foremost, potential supplier information. Sounds fairly self-explanatory. Yeah, it is. It's your company name, it's your legal status, so you're a partnership, sole trader, limited company, etc. When were you registered? There is a question on there about DUNS number. Does everyone know what a DUNS number is? Anybody not know? No. So again, if you don't know, you can go on to, if you search DUNS number and you are a limited company, there will be a number. It can then be used to credit check your business. They will ask about persons of significant control. So again, make sure that whatever you put in the supplier selection questionnaire is consistent with what's on the company's house website. We've seen in the past, when evaluating, things that are completely different. They will ask if you have a parent company, and if you have a parent company, they might ask about parent company guarantees. So again, if you've got a parent company, you need to have that conversation. They'll ask about the bidding model. So are you the lead bidder? Are you bidding as a consortium? What's your relationship? And if you are bidding as part of a consortium, they will want to see these questions completed for every organisation within that consortium. They'll also ask if you're going to use subcontractors, and if you are, they will ask for details about the subcontractors. So how much of the contract are you planning to subcontract to them? Who are they? Again, some of the core basic information here: organisation name, address, DUNS number, VAT number, company size, will be requested for your subcontractors. So if you've got all of that to hand in advance, that will save you time. Remember, you've got a maximum of probably 4 weeks, 30 days. You don't want to spend 2 or 3 days chasing this information from your subcontractors. And they'll ask for contact details about who to contact for any queries outside of the portal. As a word of advice, typically, rather than giving an email address, so rather than jonathan@bassetchbiz.com, if you've got a generic email address that you use for bids and tenders, or an information inbox that you use, so info@bassetchbiz.com, for example, give that one, because if they contact you and you happen to be away or out of the office, uncontactable, if it's going to a generic inbox, hopefully there will be someone monitoring that for you, and they will pick up the questions at an earlier stage than you otherwise might. So generic inbox there, as long as it's monitored. You will also be asked about good standing and exclusions. And again, this is really important, because this is the pass-fail section ultimately. So there are some elements where you have a mandatory exclusion, so you absolutely will not continue, and there are others that are discretionary. So mandatory exclusions are around criminal activity. If any of the directors of the business have convictions for corruption, fraud, terrorism, money laundering, child labour, exploitation, or non-payment of taxes, then that can lead to a mandatory exclusion from the process. And this is all about, put yourself in the buyer's shoes, this is all about risk management. So we do not want to contract, if we are the buyer, with an organisation that could potentially bring us into disrepute. If for whatever reason, cash flow reasons, etc., you have entered into a payment arrangement with HMRC for payment of taxes, that doesn't count under non-payment of taxes, provided you have kept up to that payment arrangement. There are then a number of discretionary exclusions where if you answer yes to any of these, you have to give more details and the buyer will then make a judgment call. And in my experience, I've never seen a bidder excluded where there have been discretionary exclusions, provided the bidder has articulated what happened, why, what they've learned from it, and what systems they've put in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. And that's things like environmental breaches. It's around things like whether or not you've had employment tribunals, whether you've had contracts terminated as a result of poor performance, etc. So those sort of things. I'm sure none of that would be applicable to any of you on the workshop this morning, but all of those things are a matter of public record and evaluators do check. So if it has happened, just be upfront, but tell them what it is that happened and how you've learned from it to stop it from happening again. You will also be asked as part of the selection questionnaire whether or not you can provide financial information, so accounts, for typically the last 2 years. That's the recommended best practice. Some might still ask you for 3 years accounts. And again, best practice now is that you shouldn't have to submit those with your bid opportunity. They should only be submitted if you are successful. But again, some public bodies still do ask for them. If you haven't got 2 years accounts, they will ask for details of turnover, a cash flow forecast, and possibly a letter from your bank. So again, you cannot be excluded purely because you do not have 2 years trading history. They will ask for further information. We talked earlier about any financial threshold. So as I say, typically, if an annual contract value is more than 50% of your total turnover, you'll be seen to be high risk and therefore less likely to secure the contract. And if you're part of a group business, they might well ask you for a parent company account or a parent company guarantee. You will be asked about technical and professional ability, and that's the heading. So what they're looking for here are contracts that you have delivered previously, up to 3. And that doesn't mean 3, it is up to 3. So if you've only got 1 or 2 examples, that's still relevant. You can still submit them and it won't work against you. And they will ask for some fairly basic information. So who was the customer? What are the contact details for them? A description of the contract. And just as a word of advice, don't just put architectural services, don't just put, whatever your business is. Give them a little bit of detail. You've got to give contract start and end dates and contract value, but give them some background. Bring that contract to life. Sometimes there'll be a word count in there, so you might have 200 words, you might have 500 words, but a 2-word response in there doesn't really help the evaluator to understand what you can deliver as part of your business. But what is really important is that you check with the company you are using as a reference that they are happy for you to do so. So check a number of things. As part of the bid response, you will actually have the proposed timescales. Now, public sector are really good at setting timescales and saying you've got to submit your response to us by 12 noon on the 1st of March, and we will evaluate them between the 2nd of March and the 15th of March. And you think, right, okay, so there's almost a 2-week evaluation period. That's the period in which they will potentially contact your references. Doesn't always go according to plan. Public sector don't always stick to their published timescales. but it's worth checking with your referee that they will be available when you think they're going to be contacted. They're not going to be on holiday. I have seen it happen. I've contacted potential referees and I've been told, no, I'm sorry, you can't speak to them. They died 2 years ago. No, that person left the company 5 years ago. Or no, you get an automatic email response back because they're on holiday. So check that your referees are contactable, and also check that they are happy to provide you with a reference. Again, I've received written responses back saying, no, we absolutely would not work with this organisation again for these reasons. That's not really a good reference. So make sure that you've got that information sorted as part of your process. Again, they will ask about subcontractors. So where you are working with public sector is obligated to make payment to you within 30 days of a correctly presented invoice. The public sector will expect you to do the same with your supply chain and make payment to your supply chain also within 30 days. So you will have to sign up to that commitment if you are successful. So again, make sure you factor that in as part of your cash flow activity. Does anybody on the call have a turnover that's more than £36 million? No? Okay, so this is a mandatory requirement for companies that are turning over more than £36 million. You have to have a statement in relation to modern slavery and what your business does to prevent modern slavery within your supply chain. We are starting to see that creep into lower value bid opportunities. It's still sort of at the moment up in the several millions, but there is some creep there. So where you have supply chains, what are you doing to make sure that that everybody is paid at least minimum wage? There's no forced labour, no child labour, etc. Probably worth thinking that through. It's also useful from a social value perspective, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the workshop. Insurances, the level of insurance that's required will be specified. You have to make sure that you can have that insurance in place by contract award or upon contract award. Again, larger value opportunities, there is a requirement around skills and apprenticeships. That's for opportunities at the moment that are over £10 million in value. And you might well be asked to demonstrate satisfactory past performance. And that can be from the same customers that you include as referees, or it can be from different customers. But again, can you do that? Who will you approach? Worth thinking that through in advance. Really important, because all of that can be time consuming. And actually what you really want to be doing is not focusing on those elements of the bid. You want to be focusing on the quality responses, because that's where you will score the points. So let's have a look at some of the quality responses. Before we do, does anyone have any questions? No? Okay. So I'm going to cover this slide, and you're going to look at this and you're going to think, well, that's really obvious. It's so basic, I don't even know why we're covering it. If you'd evaluated bids, you would understand why I'm covering this. So as part of the bid response, read it through. Is there a requirement to submit with a particular font or a particular size of font? Is there a requirement around word count? If there is, follow those instructions, because as an evaluator, if you do not follow those instructions, legitimately, I can exclude you from the process because you haven't complied with the requirements. Now, it's going to sound harsh, but I've done this in the past where I've had 80+ bid responses to evaluate, and each bid response might take me 2, 3, 4 hours to go through thoroughly, the first thing I will do is I will sort of skim that bid response to make sure that everybody has followed those instructions. Now, word count is a different one. There are two schools of thought here. If there is a word count restriction on a question, so let's say you've got a question that says, please describe your quality management systems, and you've got 1,000 words. If you submit 1,500 words, I can either exclude the question completely because you've not complied, or I can read the first 1,000 words and evaluate those 1,000 words. And it depends, there will be a protocol that the evaluators will follow for each one. So, do not fall foul of the process on a technicality. The next one again is obvious.
Sorry, Jonathan, how is it seen if you put less than the words? So say you can't think of any, if there's 1,000 words, you can only think of 500.
Right, that's a really good question, Lisa. Thank you. So it's obviously you need to try and be as succinct as you can be, but have a think about the question. So if you think you've answered the question in 500 words, but the evaluators are expecting 1,000, go back to the question and make sure you have answered all of the question and you've not missed part of it out, and make sure you've actually given that evidence and examples to support the response. And if you have done all of that and you've sort of complied with the requirements that will score you the maximum points, that's fine. But equally, and again, I've seen first-hand responses, please describe your quality management systems, 1,000 words, and a bidder has replied, we have ISO 9001. And that was the response, which scored absolutely nothing because it didn't answer the question. And there was more to it than just please describe it. We'll look at a sample question in a minute. So yes, you can answer under the word count, but make sure you are doing everything you need to do to maximize your score. And if you are a long way adrift, so if you've got 200 words and they've asked for 1,000 words, something probably isn't right in terms of what you've responded. So go back to it and have a look. The area where people do trip up very regularly is they actually answer a different question to the question that has been asked of them. It's so common, it's untrue. So you'll be asked to describe what you do or how you do it. And the danger is you start answering the question, you do go off on a tangent, and that then becomes the bulk of your response. But you haven't. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt there. Off the back of what that lady's just said, whilst the question may give a maximum, 90% of the time it won't give a minimum.
No, it doesn't.
Off the back of what you've just said, if the question is fairly short, it's difficult then to answer the question to the, let's say, 500 word capacity, but then equally so, it's difficult not to answer the question without going outside of the question that's answered. Yeah. Now, one of the reasons we've just been caught out on a tender was we answered the question. The question wasn't really very deep in the question it was asking, but we then discovered that we were then getting marked down against answers other companies had given, which were actually outside of the answer that was requested.
Right. Okay. So there's lots to unpack in there. So first of all, if it's a brief question, you are well within your right to go back under the clarification process and ask them to elaborate on what specifically they are looking for within that response. Because if they have run the process properly, when they are issuing the tender document, at the same time, they will come up with some sort of mark structure that's internal. You won't get to see this, obviously, but it will give them, this is what a 5 looks like. This is what we would expect to see to score top points, etc., etc. So if they are not providing you with that level of detail, then you absolutely have the ability to go back and ask under the clarification process for them to elaborate on what they are expecting to see within the question. Now, what you've then just said is, other bidders have given other information. Now, that's actually quite legitimate as part of a response, because it's how you interpret the question. This is where, working as a team, you will all come up with something slightly different as part of a response to a question, because everyone interprets it in a different way. However, what they can't then do is award points to a bidder who has answered a question with something that's not part of a question. And I'm trying to think of an example. So going back a while, I did some work with a debt recovery organisation, and this was for a local authority, and it was about parking charges. And one of the questions asked about CCTV camera cars. The little smart cars that sit with the camera on the top and drive around the town and pick up offences. One of the questions asked about that, and the company I worked with was very honest in saying that to cover a geographical area the size of that particular local authority, they would deploy a maximum of 2 cars at any one point in time. Another bidder responded and said they had 100 vehicles, and they scored more points for that. And we challenged, because what we said was, as part of your assessment process, how many vehicles, in your opinion, is the optimum number for your geographic area of operation, for your local authority district? Because if that competitor put 100 vehicles into your area, they'd just cause gridlock, and it's totally unnecessary. So yes, you can, if this is where you have to think about added value and what you're responding. But if a competitor comes up with something you've not thought of that's relevant, yes, they can score points that you then will not score. But it has to be relevant and it has to be appropriate. And if it isn't appropriate, then you can challenge that. Does that help?
Yeah, it explains it sort of 90%. And obviously, different organisations operate differently. My main gripe, my main point was the fact that the way we were scored, we weren't scored against the answer given. Mm-hmm. We were scored against the answers
that someone else gave.
And that to me was wrong. We answered the question that was there. The question wasn't expansive. It didn't say this, it didn't say that. It was very specific with what it asked.
Yeah.
And then when they provided the answer, they said that we were marked down against the answers other people had given because they covered areas like this, that, and the other. Mm-hmm. But the question didn't ask that.
Yeah. So you could have pushed back on that, I think. What I will say, because it's very difficult to talk specifics without seeing the specifics, but what I will say, Alan, is I'm quite happy if you want to email me the bid you submitted and the feedback. I'm quite happy to have a look at that outside of the workshop, and we can have a separate conversation about that might help for future bids.
We have challenged it, to be honest with you. So we are in the middle of a challenge process.
Right.
So,
Okay. Well,
yeah.
so have you got someone advising you on that challenge, or are you just...
I have now.
Brilliant. Good.
That's, yeah. We'll catch up later.
Okay. Oh, okay. See what you're saying. Okay. No, that's fine. Like I said, happy to have a look at that particular one. So yeah, think about how you structure the response. Think about what they're asking. Again, really important. Be specific and apply the so what test. If you're making a statement, think about, well, so what? What's the benefit to the customer? And to give you an example, none of you here, as far as I can tell from the delegate list, operate in the forensic science sector. I've worked with a forensic science company for over 12 years now. And when I first started working for them, their bid responses weren't very good, which is why they brought me in. And I worked with them, and I'll give you an example. This was for DNA services, and I'm going back now 12 years when the technology was good, but not as advanced as it is now. One of their bid responses said, this was for police forces, we process 98% of all 1BFs within 24 hours. And that was the statement. And I looked at that and I said, don't know what you mean. That's meaningless. And we were sat around a table. There were about 10 forensic scientists, the managing director, the sales director, etc. And they said to me, well, yeah, that wouldn't mean anything to you because you're not a forensic scientist. And I said, no, and nor will the evaluators be. You'll have a forensic scientist on the evaluation panel, but you'll also have a contract manager. You'll probably have someone from finance, etc. And what they said was to me afterwards, well, an O1BF is a DNA crime scene stain. So we process 98% of crime scene stains, DNA samples, within 24 hours. And the industry average is 72 hours. So the benefit to the customer is that if you're holding a suspect in custody, you will have a response pretty much guaranteed before you have to release them from custody, which means that if you've released them, you've then got to track them down again if that sample comes back and it's a positive match. And I said, yeah, you didn't say any of that in your bid response. That's why you didn't score the points. So you have to step back and actually think about your target audience. And your target audience is the evaluators, not all of whom will be subject specialists. So always apply that so what test. And again, and this is sort of back to what you've just been saying, Alan, it's about interpretation of the question. So think about the question and what they might actually be looking for, because they don't always ask. And in that case, please do go back and challenge and ask them for further clarity about what it is that they're looking for. It really can make a difference. So, sorry, I've been so long on that slide that the screen's frozen. Right, so I just want to talk you through a question. And this is from the forensic science sector. So the question was, and this was, I've taken this from a specific bid. So any potential provider of forensic services to Anywhere Police, I've anonymised them, must have an in-depth understanding and experience of the requirements of the criminal justice system and partner agencies, including a track record working with prosecution teams. Please provide an example which demonstrates you have sufficient experience to deliver the services which your team is responsible for. Detail any relevant qualifications which your team members hold. Demonstrate how you can deliver services to Anywhere Police, and detail the capacity you have to provide those services. You may wish to refer to relevant human, financial, and physical resources. So that's quite a complex question. I'm guessing that's much more in-depth, Alan, than the question you were responding to. So within that, there are several different questions within that one question. So it's really important before you start to answer that you actually understand the question and understand each component part, and then answer that component part specifically. And again, this is about making it really easy for the evaluator to be able to go through and say, have they answered the question? So my advice to all of you here is when you see the question, break it down into the different component parts that they are asking to see. So part one on this question is giving that in-depth experience and understanding of the requirements of the criminal justice system. So your opening statement will be about the knowledge that you have of the criminal justice system, how it works, experience you've had of working. So in this particular case, the bidder cited how many police forces they worked for, etc. They talked about working with prosecution teams, so with the police forces, gathering the evidence, presenting the evidence. They talked about presenting evidence in court under oath. So they started to break down the question into the component parts. They then picked a specific example of a case that was relevant. So this particular question actually related to firearms offences. So they picked a specific example that they had worked on a particular firearms case. They articulated the case, the steps that they undertook in the process of analysis. They detailed the team members. They actually included a headshot of each member of the team to bring that person to life. They talked about the qualifications, the length of service they had, etc. They then moved on in a separate section to talk about how they could deliver the services. They talked about geographic location. They talked about collection and delivery service of firearms that needed examination. They talked about the capacity that they had. So what they do is they talked there about, they have X number of team members. So they have a team of 7 firearms examiners, and each firearms examiner has a capacity to deal with X hundred number of cases each year. That gives them a total capacity. They then set out what their existing capacity was from current contracts, and they could demonstrate to the customer that they had sufficient surplus capacity to actually deliver the contract without impacting on any of the turnaround times on service.
Jonathan, sorry, do you include team members' names in these sorts of bids? Because obviously with GDPR, etc., how is that?
So yeah, and that again, yeah, thank you, Lisa. Really good point. You have to have permission from your team to include them. But obviously, bear in mind, this is a sales process. You are trying to win the work, and you are trying to make this personal. You're trying to build that connection with the customer. And again, it's part of a sort of demonstration of experience. If you say we have a team of 5 and they have 100 years experience, that's fine. But if you say we have a team of 5 members led by, Joe Brown, Joe has got 20 years experience, she previously worked for the Forensic Science Service, etc., etc., you are then further demonstrating that experience, so you're going further towards scoring the full 5 points. It also demonstrates to the evaluator that you've got team members in place, and if you win the contract, you're not going to have to go out and recruit people from scratch. So it's a conversation you need to have with your staff as to whether or not they're happy to be named in bids, but you need to give them the context of why it's beneficial to include them within the bid.
Could you just put a first name, or is that not?
You can,
acceptable?
yes, absolutely. If someone doesn't want to give full details, then yeah, a first name is equally as good, yes. Does that help in terms of how you might start to structure a response to a question? Anyone got any questions? No? Okay. Right, so in terms of responding to the question, the minute you get the bid opportunity land on your desk, it's really tempting just to dive straight into it and start answering. And I would say that's actually quite a dangerous strategy. So there are lots of things that you need to do. So how many of you would automatically just look at a previous bid response before starting the next bid opportunity? Anyone willing to admit? No? Okay, you're all far better than a lot of the companies I work with then, because the default position for lots of people is, well, we've answered a bid similar to this in the past. Let's go straight back to that and we'll just lift the answers. So again, we've talked about this earlier, copy and paste, very dangerous. It's useful in part because what you might find is it's that old Pareto 80-20 rule. You might find that 80% of what you've said previously is still relevant, but unless you've read the customer's specification, you won't know that for certain. So to start answering the bid before you've understood what the customer's looking for is dangerous. And as I say, I have evaluated bids that have referred to a completely different customer. So the positives, you can gain an understanding of what you've said previously. You can refresh your memory. It can provide you with lots of ideas about how you structure a response to a particular question. But always take into account the score you've received on the previous bid. So if your previous response only scored a 3 and the scoring scale was out of 5, why would you want to copy and paste that response? Because the chances are you would score a 3 again. So what would you do differently? The information in previous bids is most likely out of date. So again, you might want to think about, we need more up-to-date, more recent answers. And the big danger with copy and paste is you're tempted, and what typically happens is you'll review the answer you've submitted previously, which was to a slightly different question, rather than actually answering the question that you have been asked to address on this particular opportunity. So some pros and cons. So it's always helpful to have a bid library. Yes, it can be helpful to refer back to previous bids to refresh your memory about what you've said, but do proceed with caution. Again, we've sort of touched on this, but read the question carefully. And it was a good point that Alan raised earlier. If the question is very vague, do go back and ask them specifically, what is it you want to see? Because everybody will interpret it differently. And who's to say that I'm right and Alan's wrong, or Alan's right and I'm wrong? Actually, go back and ask them. And if they don't answer, well, that gives you better grounds then, if you're unhappy with the outcome, or if you think the outcome is wrong, it gives you better grounds to actually raise a challenge. So if you've asked that question up front and still not had a response, then it does make it challenging, but it gives the buyer cause for concern as well, because the last thing the buyer wants is any form of challenge. There is also, and we'll touch on this later, there is also the government's procurement review service. So where you think something has been run either ineffectively or improperly, there is an external review service that you can use. We'll touch on that later. Do, as I've said earlier, read the specification, read it more than once, get more people to read it, make sure you all have the same understanding. Structure the response in the way that the question has been asked. So if there are multiple parts of the question, use that as part of your format. Facts, evidence, examples will always support what you are saying. If you just make the assertion, I'll say, so what? There's no evidence. It doesn't actually add any value to what you are including in your response. The evidence, the examples, that's what gives you the currency. That's what gives you the higher score. And as I've said, never ever exceed the word count. Bids nowadays are electronic. I can tell immediately when you're over word count. and we do take that into account. If I've got 20 bids to read at 3 hours a bid, that's 60 hours work. So that's nearly 2 weeks work. So I haven't got time to read 2,000 words if you've only been asked for 1,000. I haven't got time to read things that you've not been asked to submit. So it's not worth it. When you are responding, it's really important that you cover these 4 areas as part of your response. So the subject, the audience, research, and the messaging that you are giving. So the first area, the subject in particular, please do think about what it is you are saying. And if it is highly complex, like the forensic science sector, then think about who your audience is as well. And yes, there will be a technical expert as part of the evaluation panel, but equally, there will be non-technical experts, and you need to make sure that your response is geared towards those non-technical people in the panel. They need to be able to understand it. I'm going back a few years now, I read as an example, at the time, the average literacy age in Stoke-on-Trent was 11 years old. So if you were responding to opportunities in Stoke-on-Trent, you had to make sure that they could be understood really by your typical 11-year-old, because that was the average literacy age. So think about your audience and make sure your answer is written accordingly. I said earlier on this morning about researching the buy-in organisation. So where it's a larger value procurement activity, the chances are it will have been through a committee to get the approval to go out to tender. So you might well find, if you search through committee papers, you might find more background information. You might find out what options they've already considered and discounted. Again, useful to know. It's all about understanding that customer. If you are an incumbent supplier, it's really easy to be complacent because you think, well, we're the incumbent, we're bound to win this contract. And actually, a lot of incumbents fail because they're lazy in their responses, or they assume that because the buyer knows them, they don't have to give as much information in the response. When you are submitting a bid, the evaluators have to work on the basis of no prior knowledge. They cannot take anything into account that they know about you if you have not written it as part of your bid response. So that's really, really important, because lots of incumbent suppliers fail because, a challenger is coming in because they really want to win the work and they give the Rolls-Royce response, whereas the incumbent supplier thinks, well, they know this, I don't need to tell them. Yeah, that might be the case, but you've got to tell them to score the points. And again, as part of the bid response, never assume that the evaluator knows what your entire process is. So if I go back to our forensic science company, one of the unique selling points they had was they had their own collection and delivery service. So they had their own fleet of vehicles to collect samples from police forces. So they had a complete sort of, I've forgotten the word, chain of integrity, of exhibit integrity is what I was looking for. So they know that they've got control of that exhibit from it leaving the police station to reaching the forensic science lab. That's really important for police forces, because what you don't want is for someone to stand up in court and say, well, can you prove that this sample was in your control for the whole process? And if you can't, it weakens the case. They sort of took that for granted because that's just what they did. Well, yeah, it might be just what you do, but the buyer doesn't necessarily know that. And even if they do know that, you've still got to tell them, you've still got to articulate it to them. So think about what's important to that particular buyer. That's part of the research process. And once you've done all of that, think about how you then structure those messages back in such a way that you're maximizing that value. So always, when you're responding to questions, think about the subject, think about your target audience, think about what you know about that customer and what you can find out, and then think about how to structure the response that you give. And that's how you will start to craft really good and strong responses that give you a better chance of scoring the 5 points rather than the 4 points. Any questions? No one? Okay, we'll move on. So again, just building on what we've said, think about your evaluation panel. You may not know who's on the evaluation panel. Again, you might want to ask a clarification question. Who's going to be evaluating the bid? They possibly will not tell you, but they might, or they might tell you the areas that the evaluators come from. Keep sentences concise. It's really easy when you start writing an answer to have sentences that have got 60, 70, 80 words. It's really hard for an evaluator to read them. So again, think about your audience, keep your sentences concise, keep them short and to the point. You will either have in the response, you'll either have a word count response or a page count response. If it's a page count, the temptation is you stretch the margins, no paragraphs. As an evaluator, it's really hard to read a solid wall of text. So I just say that keep your sentence concise, it's much easier. Every industry has its own jargon. You will know what that jargon is because you will use it on a day-to-day basis, and you will use it and not give it a second thought. Bear in mind, the evaluator may not be a technical specialist in your industry. So where you've got abbreviations, acronyms, jargon, etc., do make sure that you spell it out at least once and say what it is. So, you know, I now know what an O1BF is, but I had no idea what it was until I worked in the forensic science sector. Your sector will be just the same. You know, I work in the water industry. I now know what Mosel is. Obviously, you know, lots of people have heard of Ofwat, but not everybody. So spell it out.
Can I ask another question on that?
You can.
Would you actually spell it out at the start of each question?
If I had the word count,
if you have a different evaluator evaluating each question, is
yes,
what I think I'm asking.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, again, Lisa, that's a really good point. Thank you. You might have different evaluators evaluating different questions. So not every evaluator will see every question. So if you can spell it out at the start of every question, yes, that is very, very helpful, and it will work in your favor. If you have a really restrictive word count, it may not always be possible. If you have a really restrictive word count, again, I would go back and ask a clarification question and explain why you feel the word count is restrictive, and ask them to reconsider and make a suggestion as to what you think it should be, because that will then allow you that flexibility. And I'm working on a bid response for a customer at the moment, and the question is 220 words, and they've asked us to respond to it in 400 words. And I've gone back and said, we genuinely, to cross-reference it back to the scoring criteria, to provide you with evidence and examples which they've asked for, and to answer the 3 different parts to the question in 400 words, they're not going to get a detailed response. So what I've asked them to do is allow 400 words for each of the 3 parts to the question. So I didn't just go back and say, please increase the word count, because if you do, the answer will probably come back no. If you can justify why you want them to increase the word count, they're more likely to consider it and come back and say yes. But yeah, if you can spell out abbreviations initially in every question, that's always good. And as we've said before, you really do need to be specific. The other thing it's worth saying is think about the language that you use. So we've talked about abbreviations, but equally pay attention to tenses. So lots of people in a response say, we will do this, we will do that. And it's sort of natural because you haven't yet won that contract. But what you're doing by saying we will do this is you're actually introducing an element of doubt into the evaluator's mind around, well, they say they will do this, but do they already do this for other customers? And that's what you need to think about in your response. So you need to phrase it as, we deliver, not we will deliver, we deliver X, Y, Z. And it can cut down on the number of words that you use, but it gives confidence. So I did some work in the social care sector, and we had a bidder where they were talking about sort of staff development. They said, we will conduct appraisals at 6 monthly intervals. We will encourage staff to undertake continuing professional development. We will encourage them to read relevant literature. We will provide training courses. Sounded really good, but we had nothing in that response to evidence that that was what they already did. Whereas other bidders actually said, all our staff must undertake this number of training courses annually, and then detail some of the training courses that they were actually undertaking. They actually set out, so they said that staff had to undertake so many hours of continuing professional development, CPD, annually, and they gave the statistic that said, I think something like 98% of their staff in the prior year, which was a COVID year, had undertaken the required number of hours. So what they were saying, they were reinforcing with the statistics to back up what they were saying. So all the while, think about what you're saying and how you're phrasing it, because that can impact on the score. And Alan said it right at the outset this morning. They lost a bid by 0.34%. Did you say it was, Alan? It was something.
0.34 of 1%.
0.34
So
of 1%.
not even 0.5%.
Yeah. So, you do not want to be in that position ever. And actually, where it's that close, I think there'll probably have been quite a lot of there should have been a lot of due diligence that the buyer took before that, but we'll talk about that afterwards. And it's all about maximizing your chances in those bid responses with the evidence, with the examples, the right tenses, demonstrating that ability to actually deliver what's required. So hopefully that has been helpful. It's really hard on these workshops because you're such a diverse group of organizations. It is really hard to go into specific questions, but typically you will be asked about your capacity to deliver, your capability. You'll be asked about systems and processes. You might be asked, depending on the nature of the contract, you might be asked about marketing and how you're going to promote particular services. You might be asked about how you will deal with customers. You might be asked about customer complaints procedures, etc. Those sorts of questions will be tailored towards your particular industry. There are some questions which are more generic, which sometimes come up in bids, sometimes don't. But what I'd like to spend the last sort of hour doing is going through some of those questions, giving you some top tips, and then answering any questions that you have in relation to what we've discussed. So the typical questions that you will find in bids generally, not always, but generally will fall into these 6 different areas. So quality, health and safety, equality or equal opportunities, environmental management, business continuity and sustainability. Certainly, I'm seeing over this last 2 years, I have seen much more emphasis on business continuity, and we'll talk about that in a while. And we are absolutely seeing much more emphasis now on social value, corporate social responsibility, as it used to be called. Anyone seeing any other sort of generic areas within opportunities that you've encountered?
It's Charlie here. I guess the other issue is data protection, and does that come on the business continuity? You know, the ability to.
Yeah, I do touch on it. So it's a good shout, Charlie. Thank you. Back in 2018, there was a real spike in questions around when GDPR legislation was introduced, and it started to form up to 20% of a bid response on the quality questions. It's easing back a little bit now, but yes, it does still get asked, and we will touch on that as well. So yeah, that's a good shout. Thank you. So in terms of quality, and obviously this isn't an exhaustive list of questions, but these are things that typically I've come across in bids over the years. So first and foremost, have you got any quality accreditations? And if you're asked that question, there is always an element of people panicking, saying, well, we've not got ISO 9001. Does that mean we can't apply? And unless they specifically say you must have ISO 9001, and I've seen that with some of the major sort of power companies, so EDF, E.ON, etc. The short answer is it should not be a barrier. Obviously, if you do have some sort of quality accreditation, all well and good, but what's important is not the quality accreditation in itself. I could have a system that says we will produce rubbish, and as long as we do that and we can evidence that we do it, we get the accreditation. So what we're looking for here is, if you have a quality accreditation, what is it, what does it cover, and give some detail about what your processes and procedures are. So describe your systems. Is your quality accreditation relevant to the particular service that you are tendering for? And if it's not the quality accreditation, are your systems and processes relevant? So again, I work with an organisation. They have a part of their business that has ISO accreditation, and another part of it doesn't. And in a nutshell, it's a billing company. So it's a print production company. So they print invoices for other companies, mail them, etc. Believe it or not, the quality accreditation does not cover the process of producing and issuing the bill. So that doesn't actually add a huge amount of value to them when you're being asked about describing quality processes around your bill production. So you have to think about the systems, the processes you have in place, and how they are relevant to the customer that you are bidding to secure the contract from. Again, within the response, you might be asked the question, but if you're not, you might want to include it anyway. How often do you review your quality processes? When you do review them, what do? If you find something that needs updating or changing, do you update it? Do you change it? How do you then communicate that to your staff? Does that have other implications on different aspects of your business? So all of that information you need to give some thought to and build into your response. And again, use examples. Where you've got examples, it's always better to use them if they reinforce the point that you are making. You might well be asked about complaints procedures. Do you have a complaints process? So if a customer's unhappy, how do they complain? Who do they complain to? I've seen complaints processes which basically say customers must complain in writing. Well, that's not always appropriate or relevant. Can they not telephone you? Does it have to be, when you say in writing, does an email count? Does a web chat count if you've got web chat on your website? So start and articulate the detail behind what you're doing. Any independent bodies involved. So again, I work with customers where they are regulated. So there is a regulator, Ofcom, for example. So there is an external complaints process that they can make reference to. Any ongoing disputes, you might be asked if you've got any ongoing disputes or whether you've had any disputes. Again, it's very tempting to lie and say, no, everything's perfect here. As an evaluator, I'll be saying, is everything perfect? Or is it that they're just not actively seeking feedback from customers? So where you've got those feedback loops, really important that you start to articulate them. Health and safety, depending on the business that you are in, health and safety does come up. You know, have you got ISO accreditation or safety in procurement, SSIP, something like CHAS or Achilles, or there are lots of different schemes out there, but do you have them? If not, do you plan to? And if you do, sometimes you will then be able to just bypass all of the other questions on health and safety in a tender. Others will ask you to articulate them. And if you don't have those accreditations, you'll be expected to articulate your health and safety policies. So you might be asked to attach a policy, you might be asked to describe it and say what it covers. You might be asked whether or not you've got a lead competent person for health and safety, what accreditations they have, qualifications, etc. It's, these are all bits of information you can start to pull together ahead of any tenders that will help you at that point of needing to submit a bid. If you have more than 5 employees, obviously health and safety executive, you've got to have a written policy. If you are under 5, you might still want to have a written policy anyway. If you've got any gaps, there is loads of information on the health and safety executive website. It's a really, really good resource. So if you've got anything that you're not sure of, then that's probably the place that you want to go and have a look. You might be asked about health and safety training. So you might be asked what training you deliver to staff. You might be asked about first aid training. Again, this is all subject to the industry that you are in. You might be asked about your accident record, statistics, lost time hours, total working hours, reportable incidents, etc. Again, be honest. If you've had incidents, just talk about what the incident was succinctly, but the important thing is what the learnings were, what you have done to actually make sure there is no recurrence of that incident in the future. That's what the evaluators are looking for. In the public sector in particular, I said this earlier on, the whole process is actually about minimising risk. So if I'm Stoke City Council, the last thing I want to do is appoint someone to deliver something on my behalf that's going to lead to adverse publicity and end up on the front page of the Sentinel. That's not what I'm about. So this is about minimising risk. No one's perfect. We're all human. Humans make mistakes. It's about how you then deal with that afterwards and how you make sure that there isn't a repetition. So that's what people will be looking for. You might be asked about, as part of the bid response, you might be asked to provide risk assessment, sample risk assessments. Again, if you are, have a think about what risk assessments are relevant to a particular contract. Don't, if you are an architect, if you're in grounds maintenance, etc., a risk assessment around changing the toner in the photocopier really isn't going to cut it as part of a bid response. But I have seen stuff like that come in. We've seen, again, as a result of COVID and home working, we've seen more emphasis on lone working, remote working policies and risk assessments. So if that's something that's relevant to your business, are those policies up to date? And again, as part of your bid response, or as part of what you're doing in your business on a regular basis, how often do you review health and safety policy? Ideally, once a year. Ideally, that policy is signed and dated annually so that it can be seen to be updated. And again, what actions come off the back of that? Does that make sense? Any questions on quality and health and safety? Okay, equality. So I'm hoping that everybody on the call is an equal opportunities employer. I'm sort of hoping that everybody is compliant with the Equality Act. And I'm sure no one would admit to it if they weren't publicly, but I'm sure you all are. But again, whilst you might have those policies in place, and if you haven't got them, it's worth having them because you might be asked to submit them as part of any bid response. Think about how you communicate those policies to your staff. How do you train staff? How do you make them aware of what's expected of them? Do your policies reference customers? So again, I've worked with organisations where, so debt recovery, for example, where there's been a significant emphasis on how you deal with customers as well as staff and how you treat them. So think about that. Do your policies reference subcontractors? If you are in the charitable sector and you've got volunteers, do they reference volunteers? How do you check what your subcontractors are doing? So if you are engaging subcontractors to deliver on your behalf, whose policies are they following? Are they following your policy or their own policy? And if they're following their own policy, have you reviewed that policy to make sure it covers everything that your policy covers? So again, things like that, just useful, important to have given that some thought in advance around, how are we going to respond if we are asked these questions? Any legal proceedings, so employment tribunals can happen, do happen. They are a matter of public record. If you are asked in a tender about whether or not you've participated in employment tribunals, don't be tempted to say no if the answer is yes, because I can search for that and look it up as an evaluator, and I will. But the important thing is what comes out of it. What are you doing differently now to stop that from happening again? Can I ask a show of hands, how many of you have got some form of environmental policy within your business, environmental sustainability? One. Sort of mixture. So environmental management is increasingly becoming important as part of bid and tender responses. I'm seeing it more and more across every sector that I'm working in at the moment. So have a think about what your business does and what the impact of what your business does is on the environment, and how can you then mitigate your impact on the environment, and start and think about how you might build that into an environmental policy, a sustainability policy, etc. A lot of the driver has come from the COP26 summit last year. We know what the impacts are on the environment. It's what you are doing to minimize them. If you are tendering now for contracts that are worth more than £5 million, there is a new requirement where you have to share an environmental plan, and there is a template that you can access on the government website for larger value procurement opportunities. You have to report on energy usage, greenhouse gas emissions, etc. as a larger business. That might not impact on some of you, but it's coming down the line. So if you are in offices, have a think about your energy usage, your carbon usage. If your business involves lots of travel, have a think about carbon emissions related to travel, and think about what you can say and do that might minimize those challenges. So again, one of the companies I work with has introduced a subsidised scheme for electric cars for staff, so that they're minimising carbon emissions. And I know there's a whole debate about whether electric's the right route or not, but it's a route. Have a think about monitoring your gas electricity consumption in your offices. What can you do? And this can be, it doesn't have to be complex, it doesn't have to be costly. It can be simple things like LED lighting installed, simple things like turning off monitors when they are not being used, turning off electrical equipment. There are added benefits here. If you are reducing your energy usage, you are reducing the cost of that energy usage on your business. And at this point in time, that's really, really important for lots of, energy prices are going through the roof. So it's really important. Have any of you heard of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? No? Yeah, Lisa, you have. So the United Nations, and Charlie, yeah, that's good. So the United Nations, quite a few years ago now, introduced or came up with and articulated a number of sustainable development goals. And they are really gaining traction in the business community. And again, not every sustainable development goal is relevant to every business. But what I would say is a lot of those goals are common sense. And I would struggle to find an argument against them. So if you have not come across them, it's absolutely worth looking into them, looking at which goals might be relevant to your business, and looking at what you can do that will contribute towards the achievement of those sustainable development goals. And you will probably find in the process that that has other benefits for your business. There is so much emphasis now on environment, sustainability, environmental management. I'm doing some work through a number of private sector supply chains, and I can think of several large retailers who have committed to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I can think of a number of large manufacturers nationwide and internationally who are committed to them. So it's not just public sector. This has an impact if you're working in the private sector as well. And like I say, they are, at the end of the day, they're good business common sense. And if you are reducing your impact on the environment, the chances are you are more profitable along the way.
We're just in the process of going through the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals questionnaire that's on their website to actually see how we fit in as an organisation.
And how are you finding the process, Lisa, so far?
We haven't started it yet. We've just we've literally just sort of started to look at it. My boss is on holiday. We're going to start looking at it next week. So yeah, it's on the action plan to do. Yeah.
And like you say, there is on the website there is a questionnaire that you can look at. And again, if you need any guidance, I would absolutely refer you back to the Growth Hub and to the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce was committed to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The Growth Hub is well aware. So there is advice and guidance out there. So, don't think, oh my God, this is something I've really got to look at. I don't know where to start. There is support out there. So do shout up, do ask the questions of others. But you will find it has benefits in your business. Moving on, because I am conscious of time and I do want to allow time for questions because you are all being very quiet. You're all too quiet, really. But I understand sometimes that is the nature of workshops on Zoom. So business continuity. How many of you, show of hands, please, how many of you have got a business continuity or disaster recovery plan? Anybody? One? Yeah, one of you. That's that's probably, for looking at the percentage, that's probably about right. Business continuity planning is really, really important for every business. Every year, 1 in 5 businesses on average will experience a major interruption to their business. Now, let's be honest, every single one of us in the last 2 years has experienced quite a significant disruption to our business through the form of COVID. Now, for some businesses, that was, you have to close immediately, significant disruption. For other businesses, they actually generated more business as a result of COVID, and that brought different pressures for them. So business continuity is really important. If you have not got a business continuity plan, it's well worth sitting down and thinking about. And I'm talking here, think about this from the perspective of your premises, if you work from premises. And even if you work from home, you're working from premises. Think about staffing, where you've got staffing. What would happen if a key member of staff was taken out of your business unexpectedly? So who are the key members of staff in your business? And it's not always, I'm sorry to say this, guys, it's not always, and ladies, it's not always the managing director. Sometimes it can be the person who's answering phones on reception, because they probably have more knowledge of your business than anybody else. So think about who the key people are in your business. Think about vehicles, think about equipment, think about site works, and think about your geographic location. And I'll put this in context. My business is based in Stafford. I have, although I'm working from home today, I have an office on Aston Fields Industrial Estate. And I don't know whether or not anyone knows Aston Fields Industrial Estate, but going back 3, maybe 4 years, the business next door to us had a fire, and it was quite a significant fire. The whole industrial estate was closed for 24 hours. So we had no access to the office. Businesses who were in the same building as I am, their staff couldn't get in. For me, it wasn't really an issue because everything I do is backed up on the cloud. So it's all remote access. So I could work from somewhere else. But actually, for those businesses that were office-based who couldn't access their premises, that caused them a real problem. So it's not just about what might happen in your business. Think about some of your neighbouring businesses. Having said that 1 in 5 businesses will experience major disruption to their business in a normal year, out of those businesses, 1 in 10 will not survive. And the businesses that don't survive are usually the ones that do not have a plan. They don't know what to do when the unexpected happens. And like I say, that unexpected isn't always necessarily a negative. It could be that you suddenly acquire more customers or there's more demand. But as a result of that, and again, I'm working with a business where they received quite a lot of inquiries from customers. They got something like 3 times the amount. They sent out an email communication to customers. They got 3 times the amount of responses to that than they anticipated. So customer service really suffered, but they didn't have a continuity plan in place. They didn't know what to do. If you've thought that process through, what you can do for them in the short term is actually redeploy staff so that you've got more staff on the phones dealing with customer inquiries coming in. So think about it from all angles, from all perspectives. It's really important. And again, increasingly, business continuity, IT systems, cyber attacks. Do any of you have Cyber Essentials accreditation? Give it some thought, because we are now in a situation where for lots of businesses, if their IT goes down, they can't operate effectively, and they certainly couldn't operate effectively for a sustained period of time. So just give that some thought. We touched on, Lisa, you mentioned, I think it was you, Lisa, that mentioned GDPR earlier on. So again, within your business? Do you have data security plans in place? Are you registered? If you need to be registered with the Information Commissioner's office, are you registered? Do you comply with GDPR legislation? How do you check? And how do you monitor that on an ongoing basis? So again, those sorts of things, really, really important. And if you take nothing else away from today, please do give some thought to business continuity. We are seeing it increasingly coming up in bids and tenders because of the last 2 years, because of COVID. Yes, services were interrupted, but the public sector had to continue to deliver. So they want supply chains that equally can continue to deliver when the unexpected happens. We're coming out of COVID. We've gone through Brexit, we went into COVID, we're coming out of COVID. We're now, this world conflict that's very topical, very current at the moment. We don't know what implications that might have if you are dealing with international supply chains, etc. That can have an impact on your business. So you need a business continuity plan that reflects that. Any questions on business continuity? No? Okay, social value. Again, hands up. How many of you have heard of the Public Services Social Value Act? 1, 2, okay, 3, good. So most of you, that's really good. So social value, corporate social responsibility is sort of the old phrase, and you might well still see that, that cropping up. Social value, this is now being built into, it's mandatory for large value procurements, so multi-million-pound procurements, it's mandatory. But equally, it is being addressed in lower value contracts, and by lower value contracts, I'm seeing this feature in contracts that are £40,000–50,000 upwards. The Public Services Social Value Act was introduced in 2012 and enacted in early 2013. It stems back, for those of you who are old enough to remember, back to 2010. There was a general election. We had a coalition government who were elected who were formed following the election in 2010. And one of the first things the government did, or had to do, was announce the outcome of a tender process to build rolling stock for trains. And there was a company based in Derby, Bombardier, who had tendered for the contract, and they lost. They were the incumbent supplier, or one of the incumbent suppliers. They lost the contract to Siemens, who were based in Germany. And off the back of that, basically, they had to make staff redundant. That had a knock-on impact on the local communities in and around Derby. So the MP in that area actually championed the Public Services Social Value Act as a private member's bill. And what he said was, when you are awarding contracts, you need to take into account wider social and community impacts as part of the evaluation process. Because yes, this contract might have been awarded to Siemens in Germany, and it might save the government or the train operating companies, I think it was the government at the time, it might save them a few £1,000,000. However, the implications of having potentially 1,400 workers who are now unemployed is the benefits bill will increase. Those workers will not have disposable income to go and spend in their local economy. That will have a knock-on impact on corner shops, cafes, restaurants, pubs, etc. It impacts on mental health services. So there is a cost attached to a procurement decision. And those costs are hidden costs, typically, or previously they certainly were. So you need to then think about, how do we take that into account as part of any procurement award process? So have a think about what your business does, what you do in your business that contributes to your local economy, your local communities. Document it. Do you encourage staff to get involved in community activity? Do you support them if they want to? And if any of you are sole traders, then, you know, and my business, there's me and one other person. I still manage to contribute to social value because we do quite a lot locally. We've sponsored local litter picks, we've been involved, etc. So there's lots of things that go on. But have a think about what you do. If you've got staff, do you encourage them to get involved? Do you support them? And I've worked with businesses where, for example, they've had guide leaders who've gone to weekend camp who've said, you know, this is what we're doing this weekend. It would be really helpful if we could leave work early on Friday to go and get everything set up ready. And some employers will say, oh, no, sorry, your contract of employment says you've got to stay at your desk until 5 o'clock. And others will say, well, you know, as long as you make the time up somewhere else, that's absolutely fine. The latter is supporting social value. The former probably isn't. So have a think about your approach. Social value covers a number of areas. It's economic. So if you are a business based in Stoke-on-Trent and you are tendering for a contract with Stoke-on-Trent City Council, there is an economic benefit because you are keeping that cash, that contract value, in the local economy. And I think it was the Federation for Small Businesses, going back quite a number of years now, did some research that basically said if you contract with a small local company, 67 pence in every pound spent on that contract remains in the local community and is recycled and respent. If you contract with a company outside the local community, outside the local economy, that figure falls to something like, I think the figure was 38 pence in every pound. So you can see the benefit of contracting at a local level. Again, environmental activity. So we've touched on environmental sustainability issues that can fall under the banner of social value. Staff training. Do you provide staff with training? Social value, because some of the skills people learn when they work for you are transferable in the local communities. Charitable activity, use of local labour. So where do you recruit your labour force from? All of those things contribute to social value. And again, if anyone's not sure about this, speak to the Growth Hub, because the Growth Hub has access to networks, social value networks, procurement networks, etc. The Chamber of Commerce, for any of you who are Chamber of Commerce members, they have a social value forum. So there is lots of information out there that will help you to look at what you're doing in your business and actually start to quantify what the impact of that might be, and how you can best maximize your bid response around that area. Does anyone have any questions on social value or any of those topic areas?
Just a question from me. I mean, I don't know whether the Chamber, the Growth Hub, have got any examples of a social value policy. I mean, obviously, you know, the policy needs to be specific to the company, but it might be helpful if there was kind of a starter for 10, a straw man style policy document. I don't know if the Growth Hub's got something like that.
It's so that's a really good question, Trish. I don't know whether you're there right at this second, and I don't know whether you would know the answer to whether or not the Chamber has that sort of template policy. Like I say, they do have a forum, a social value forum, and that's a really good point. So I will take that back and feed that back to the Chamber as a suggestion.
It'd also be useful to have like a list of maybe some topics or ideas that people could list, like you'd said, local labour, charity events, staff training. I hadn't thought of staff training as CSR, to be quite honest, or social value. So that was quite useful. So anything like that would be
right. So I don't want to scare you off, but if you go onto Google and type in social value national TOMS, TOMS, you will find, I think it's the Social Value Forum. can't remember now, it's just gone out of my head. There is, so some public bodies have a spreadsheet. This is the National TOMS framework, Targets Output Monitoring Framework, I believe, for social value. And you will look at it and it will scare you off, if I'm honest, because there are so many indicators. But what I would say is, as with everything, you do not have to have a response for every single indicator. You have to pick the ones that are relevant to your business. So that is out there. It is a national framework. It is used across the public sector, some areas more widely than others. Anybody tendering for contract opportunities in the northeast of England, every local authority in the northeast of England pretty much uses that framework to assess social value. It varies from authority to authority.
And how is that marked by the judges or the evaluators?
So that's a really good question. In some bids, it's for information purposes, but when the legislation changes in 2023, social value will account for up to 20% of the total quality score. Obviously, if you are not working in a locality where you are bidding to work, you will not be able to evidence social value in that area. So there are two things you can do. The first is you can evidence the social value you have delivered in the areas where you do work. But secondly, and more importantly, it's about setting out what you commit to deliver if you are successful in securing the contract. And when I say it's about setting out what you commit to deliver, you can't just say, we will do X, Y, Z. You have to say how you are going to do that. So it could be, for example, again, I've worked with businesses who have partnered with Citizens Advice Bureau to provide information that's relevant to local residents, that might be helpful around debt recovery, etc. I've worked with organisations who to meet their sort of environmental targets will work in areas, work with schools to plant trees, or go into schools and give careers talks. What else have I seen? All sorts of different opportunities. And sorry, I've just seen right, so in the chat, I don't know whether, so Charlie has very helpfully posted the link to the social value portal and the national TOMS, and I'm hoping everybody can see that in the chat. Thank you, Charlie, I appreciate that. So hopefully you can all see that and you'll all be able to download it or see the website. So social value does cover a really broad and sort of diverse range of areas. So do have a think about how it's relevant to your business. And trust me when I say it will always be relevant to your business in some way, shape or form, be that the community in which you are based, be that areas where you want to work. There is always something that you can find that is relevant. You just need to look for it. Any more questions on social value or any of the other areas we've covered? Okay, so moving on, he says the slides are frozen. Apologies. There we go. So there are some things that you can prepare in advance of the tenders being released. So things like your financial information, things like your key insurance documents, if you've got them stored centrally within your business, you will always know where to find them, where to go to find them if you need them. Because the last thing you want to do when you've got 30 days to respond to a bid, and that's a maximum, typically you've not seen it for a week, so you're already down to sort of 23 days, 22 days. The people you need to speak to are on holiday, or they're in meetings, or something doesn't quite go according to plan. if you can actually have that information to hand, it just saves time. The other thing that you, again, this is sort of depending on the sector really, you might be asked for key CVs relating to your staff. And there are two things to take into account here. One is a point that Lisa made earlier on, which is around GDPR, because this is personal information. So check with your staff in advance whether or not they are happy for their CVs to be featured in a bid response if requested. And if they're not, you need to abbreviate them or make them less identifiable. But the other thing you might be asked for is sort of a pen profile, so a paragraph to describe the staff and their experience stroke qualifications. Typically, most people's CVs are out of date, and I would imagine the CVs that you hold for staff in your business are for staff when they were applying to join your business, so they're not up to date. So things like that you can prepare in advance. Where you're working with subcontractors, where you've got supply chains, again, all of that key information that we talked about in the supplier selection questionnaire, you can gather all of that. So when the bid comes out, if you're going to use that supplier, you can actually email them the information they've sent to you, and you can say, can you just confirm this is still relevant, it's still accurate and up to date? They're much more likely to say yes. It's a much quicker process. You're not then having to chase them and say, I really need this piece of information back from you before this date. So that will always help. Your policies, your procedures, make sure they're up to date and regularly reviewed. We've not really touched on client case studies. We've talked about references, but case studies and testimonials really do add value to bids where it's relevant to the question that you are being asked. So I've been working with a customer this week, and one of the questions they are being asked is they're being asked to put on a series of events, and they've actually described the experience that they have. They've also included a testimonial from a delegate who participated in one of the events, but equally they've included a testimonial from the event organizer, so from the organization that contracted them to deliver the event, setting out how efficient, effective, and professional that event was. So testimonials, appropriate testimonials, will always add value to a bid, as will case studies. And case studies and testimonials, bear in mind, aren't just usable in bids. You can use them on your website, on social media. You can use them in opportunities and responses to other organizations, private sector bids, etc. So they will always be helpful. You can have them on your website, good marketing tool, but really in bids, it's back to that demonstrable evidence that we talked about in the scoring criteria. So we've touched on this already, but when the tender document is released, read it, then read it again. Do you understand it? Are there any ambiguities? Are the questions vague that you need to answer? If it is, ask the questions, ask for clarity. It's really important that you're responding to the brief that you need to respond to, rather than the brief that you think they're asking you to respond to. So get that clarity. Again, bid no bid process, we touched on this earlier. Is it a good strategic fit for your business? So if you look at it and say, well, they've issued the specification, yes, I think we can deliver 50% of what they want. My challenge back to you would be, is that a useful spend of your time if there's 50% of it that you're really going to have to work hard and deliver because it's not something you've done before? Because there will be other bidders who typically will be a closer strategic fit to that response, and it might be worth you investing the time elsewhere. And what are the submission deadlines? Can you achieve them? Yeah, yes, You can ask for an extension to deadline. If it's a really challenging deadline, you can ask. They are under no obligation to say, yes, you can have that extension to deadline, but they might. You know, nothing ventured, nothing gained, but give them a reason why. Don't just say, we need an extension to deadline. If you've got 5 other bid opportunities, if it's the Christmas holidays, spell it out. And again, I've seen this. I saw a bid released on the 20th of December. I think it was the 20th of December last year, for return on the 3rd of January. Now, you have to question the motives behind an organisation that's issuing a bid, knowing that most people are not going to be at work. We did go back and ask for an extension to deadline, and that particular buying organisation, it was a local authority, that particular organisation came back and said, yes, sorry, we didn't think, you can have an extension, and they extended the deadline to the 31st of January. So that was a genuine oversight on their part. And sometimes you think, oh, they've done this deliberately. That must be because they've got someone in mind. That's not the case. More often than not, it's cock up rather than conspiracy. So, it's always worth asking the question. Like I said, the worst they can say is no. So when you're completing the tender, and again, we've said all of this earlier on, but I make no apology, because the bids that win are the bids where people have read the questions carefully. They've dissected the questions, just as we did in the example earlier on this morning. They've then actually answered the question that has been asked and not gone off on too much of a tangent. The response was relevant, it met the specification, it actually addressed the question, and it referenced back the scoring criteria. So where the scoring criteria says to score 5, you've got to provide added value. So you've got to go above and beyond the requirement. If you just answer the question and meet the specification, are you going to score full marks? Possibly not. To go above and beyond, you need to bring in that added value if they've called it out as part of the scoring criteria. We've touched on the word count on several occasions. We've talked about relevant evidence, relevant examples. We've talked about providing proof that you can actually meet their capacity and capability requirements. We've not touched on yet supporting documents. The Public Contract Regulations 2015 tried to reduce the number of documents you had to submit for a bid response. But some buying organisations, some local authorities, central government departments to a lesser extent, but some local authorities will ask for copies of all of your policies and procedures, and they'll ask for them as part of the bid submission. If they ask for them, please make sure that you do attach them, because not attaching them can be a reason to exclude you from that bid process. Having said that, never attach a document if they don't ask for it, and certainly not marketing literature, because the evaluators just will not have time to read any marketing literature that they've not requested. Let's say to evaluate a bid response can be 2, 3, 4 hours. The evaluators will all have a day job to do as well. So make sure that as part of the process, you're only providing them with what they've asked for. Really, really important that when you are checking with other people around what the question actually means and what the response needs to cover, that you have an agreement on what you are including. You don't want to get to the 11th hour and have someone say, well, I thought we were going to include XYZ as part of our response, and we haven't. Because what you do not want to be doing is amending your response in that last 24 hours. So that leads me on to, before you submit the document, you always need to allow enough time to prepare a first draft of your bid response. and you need someone to be able to review that, preferably somebody who has not been involved in the production of the bid response, someone who has read the specification, someone who's read the question, and someone who is not afraid to challenge you. There is nothing worse than you give it to someone to read and they go, oh, that's fantastic, that's brilliant. If they say that to you on a first draft, they're probably telling you what they think you want to hear. So you need someone who's not afraid to challenge. And I can guarantee you pretty much a first draft response is never good enough to submit. So if you're submitting your first draft, think twice. Make sure someone reviews your pricing submission. Again, I did some work for a local authority. It was an appointment of an external auditor. One of the auditors completely disregarded the specification around pricing, so was ruled out because they did not follow the guidelines about what should be included and what should be excluded from their price. So make sure someone has reviewed your price submission. And equally, as I said back at the outset this morning, think about what is your walkaway price. So if you find out a competitor has won the work at a lower price than you, your response is, well, good luck to them. At that price, they're welcome to it. If you sit and say to me, we would have delivered the work for that, my response to you is, well, that's the price you should have submitted at then, because you will not get a second opportunity when it comes to bidding. Again, make sure your document's been proofread. And by proofread, I don't mean that you've run it through the Microsoft spell checker, because words can be misspelled but still spelled correctly for in a different context. So, bear that in mind. And sometimes the grammar check, etc., doesn't always pick things up. So you need to make sure that that's the case. Where you are submitting electronically on an online portal, you can upload documents well in advance. So don't leave it all to the last minute. I said earlier on, 12 noon deadline really does mean 11:59 and 59 seconds at the very latest. Beyond that, the portal will cut off. Ideally, you need to be uploading at least 24 hours in advance and possibly 48. You can always pull documents back once you've uploaded them. And until you press that submit button, I can't see what documents you've uploaded on the portal. So there's no disadvantage to uploading them ahead of the time scale. So in terms of next steps, obviously think about your business strategy. Think about whether bids and tenders are the right strategy for your business. Clearly, you will have a business development strategy that you are working towards. That needs to have a number of different routes to market, a number of different sales channels. Bids and tenders are just one form, one type of sales channel. It's much more prescriptive, but it will sit alongside all of your other sales activity. There are benefits to working with public sector, and that does include the longevity of the contract, working capital benefits, cash flow benefits. If you know you're going to be paid, within 30 days, absolutely you can plan accordingly. And finally, the final point is, we've covered a lot of ground today in a very short time, and I'm equally conscious we've done it online, and you will not have got the same value from this as we would have done had we have been face-to-face, where face-to-face people would have asked more questions and would perhaps have taken more from it. So thank you all for listening to me this morning. Thank you for those that did ask questions. We do have, I think, if I look at my watch, we've got 6 minutes. So we've got 5 minutes because I know that Trish will want to summarise. But does anyone have any questions, anything we've not covered that you particularly want to pick up as part of the session. I'll put my contact details up on the screen there. So if anyone's got any questions, or if you think of anything outside of today, by all means, get in contact. Christian, did you have your hand up there?
Yeah, please. Again, I'm sorry, everybody else. It's kind of specific to architecture, I suppose, or sort of design bids as well. But noticeably, a lot of the time when we're coming, it's sort of looking at putting bids in for things. Because there's a design element. There's often a sort of a question about, do you start proposing? Some of them obviously ask for design proposals as well, and there's within the industry there's this sort of concern that you're basically working, as most design sort of industries are, you're doing a bit of work for free for them, and they can use that idea and everything and whoever wins the bid might take on the ideas you've presented when you're submitting. And I just wondered if there's ways around that, or if it's, and that problem is obviously you found in the past, if you've answered all of the key questions in a bid, not necessarily stuff that's public procurement, but you're sort of, if you just stick to the points and you don't provide sort of design solutions for what you might do, you then don't win the bid, and you find you end up seeing the proposal that has been put in by somebody else, and they've invested time in actually
there is, I can't give you a definitive answer on that, unfortunately. Absolutely worth clarifying with the buyer whether or not, some will say we want to see a sample of designs, and yes, they are asking you to work in effect for free. You're working at risk, and you then have to make that commercial decision around, are you willing to make that investment in that particular customer? Is it a customer that you really, really want to attract? But ask for clarification. You can say to them, would they like to see a sample design, one sample design, so that you're restricting the amount of time that you work. So I've seen that in architectural bids. Unfortunately, there is no easy answer in your sector, because there's always going to be somebody who's willing to invest the time to really try and secure the client and do a lot of the work up front. And it's wrong, in my view, but equally, from a buyer's perspective, they've got to have confidence that, that they're working with someone who can follow the design brief. And that's where it becomes difficult. So yeah, sorry, that's not really an answer to the question. It's a bit of a cop-out, but there is no easy answer to it, I'm afraid. Alan,
you've covered very in depth in a short period of time a lot of subjects there, but just spinning the subject round from the client perspective, is there a set of rules that are written down that local authority and local government have to follow 100%? Because my own experience is a lot of them seem to make it up as they go along. Right,
okay. So it's a really good question. The short answer is yes, but it depends. So for larger value procurements, so typically £200,000 lifetime contract value, they have to follow the Public Contract Regulations 2015. If ever you struggle to get to sleep at night, that's the document you really need to read, because you'll be asleep within 2 minutes. And a lot of what we've said this morning is based on the principles of Public Contract Regulations 2015. For procurement below those thresholds, and it's £200,000 for goods and services, it's about £5 million for works, so for construction type projects. Below that, each local authority will have a set of standing financial instructions. They might well have their own procurement strategy that's on the website, and they should be following that particular process. I did some work with a local authority in Staffordshire, one of the smaller authorities. where I actually trained all of their staff on their own procurement principles, because if it's not something you do on a day-to-day basis, you don't always know what you should be doing. And yes, it's incumbent on them to go and find out, but they have the same time pressures that everyone else has, and sometimes they don't. So yes, they should be following public contract regulations or the authority's own financial standing instructions. I mentioned this earlier on and I didn't go into detail. If you think there has been a breach or there's been something that's done improperly, the Cabinet Office of Government has something called the Procurement Review Service. And you can search for that on Google. It's very good. They will listen to businesses. You can either do it anonymously or you can be named. If they think there has been a breach of the regulations, they will pick that up with the authority concerned. Equally, if you are contracting in the public sector, if you're working in the public sector and you are not getting paid, they will take up non-payment of invoices on your behalf as well. So that's the Procurement Review Service, and it's part of the Cabinet Office. Any other questions? Has everyone got something useful out of this morning? Has it been a benefit?
Definitely.
Brilliant, thank you. Like I say, my details are on screen, so if you have any questions, if there's something you think of, by all means drop me an email, a text, or pick the phone up, and I'll be happy to try and answer them offline for you. Thank you all very much. Like I said at the outset, it's not the most riveting subject matter in the world. I've tried to make it as interesting as I possibly can, but I'm conscious that it's been me doing a lot of the talking rather than you, so apologies for that, and thank you for bearing with me. Trish, do you want to say anything just to wrap up?
Yeah, so just to sort of echo what you said, really, to be honest, Jonathan, it was a really good workshop, and like you said, it's a bit of a strange one. It's interesting as such as you need to know it, but it's not something, like you said, that's particularly riveting. It's hard to make it sort of stand outish as such, let's say, but I think it's gone really well, and I hope, like Jonathan said, that you've all got something out of today. Obviously, thank you all for staying the whole way through, and I'll make sure that I send your names off with your email addresses directly to the CPD assessors, and they'll send your certificates out roughly within around 10 to 14 working days from the date of sort of getting that all approved by them. So they should all come to you directly. But again, just a massive thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you all found it useful, and thank you again, Jonathan, for speaking.